Okay, so I'm going to try to do some commentary here on this. Um, Jordan Peterson is doubling down on some of his statements, and I'm bringing this up because I think that really there's a big problem with the approach that not just Jordan, but conservative people in general are taking to this issue. Um, you know, like for instance, the Matt Walsh movie I just watched the other night, What is a Woman? And I think it's a big mistake to let the left, the leftists or whatever, the Marxists, to let them have all aspects of positive affirmation as their tool, and for the opposing tool to simply be brutal honesty all the time. And of course, Jordan's famous for his axiom that you should tell the truth always, or at least don't lie. But I think that this is a time where this is a point of nuance that we really need to understand, because without a positive message, we won't have the impact in people's lives that we really want to have. So I'm going to play some of this video and then pause it and kind of go along with what's being said.
That's great. Okay, so I thought what people might find useful for this episode, I'm going to ask you for advice on a number of topics I think people will find helpful.
Yeah.
And maybe delve a little bit into gender differences, just to keep things spicy, keep some people out there angry.
Yeah, because I don't think I've irritated like a million people for at least a week.
Exactly.
So it's definitely time to say
it.
something, outrageous or / true.
Outrageous / true. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How did you feel? Let's start with this, actually. A couple weeks ago, you tweeted something out that, I'm going to bring it up, that got a crazy amount of attention, which...
Sports Illustrated, swimsuit edition, I believe you're referring to.
Yes.
I tweeted out, sorry, not beautiful. Yeah, people weren't very happy with that.
And then everyone got upset.
Yes, they did. And then I left Twitter again, more or less, right after that. And everyone assumed that was why. And it wasn't.
No.
It was, I suppose in some sense it was, because what happened was an indication of the problem with Twitter. But I had been not reading Twitter comments for about 3 weeks, although I had been tweeting through an intermediary, one of my staff members. So I'd email him a tweet, but not reading comments, because I found that quite
irksome.
Yeah,
like you're associating with the
devil.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, it was like sort of like standing in a public park where anybody, no matter who they were, could come up and yell at you to any size audience about anything they wanted, day or night. And so I've been thinking that through. I'm going to write an article about what's wrong with Twitter and social media in general. But no, I looked at the Sports Illustrated cover, and they had a rather overweight young woman, quite symmetrical, so nice facial features and so forth, with a very revealing swimsuit on the cover. And I thought, no, like not in a personal way, but it's unbelievably manipulative for about 3 different reasons. The first,
I'm not sure it's really not in a personal way, as I've listened to this whole thing, but
is it's a very tawdry attempt to capitalize on cheap sales. And I mean cheap in a specific way. Sports Illustrated hit the gold mine with their swimsuit cover, I suppose 20 years ago, whenever they established that. Because obviously it's a sports magazine, so it's about athletics. It's about athletic people. It's about athletic bodies. And they had a swimsuit issue, and it really was a big hit. And then it became kind of a cultural icon. And it's a very specific kind of cultural icon because...
So here he gives this really charitable view about the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. And I don't think that some of what he's saying is very accurate. And actually, if we go on Wikipedia, we can find the swimsuit issue was invented by Sports Illustrated editor Andre Laguerre to fill the winter months, a typically slow point in the sporting calendar. He asked fashion reporter Jewel Campbell to go on a shoot to fill space, including the cover with a beautiful model. So they're models, not athletes. That was the original goal. And this was because there was no sports happening. The first issue, released in 1964, entailed a cover featuring Babette March and a 5-page layout. Campbell soon became a powerful figure in modeling and molded the issue into a media phenomenon by featuring bigger and healthier California women, which that's an interesting connotation. In the 60s, bigger was part of being healthier. And printing the names of the models with their photos, beginning a new supermodel era. In the 1950s, a few women appeared on the cover of Sports Illustrated, but the 1964 issue is considered to be the beginning of the current format known as the swimsuit issue. The issue that got the most letters was the 1978 edition. In 1997, Tyra Banks was the first black woman on the cover. Since 1997, it's been a standalone issue, and it just goes on and tells them things. So, it's basically mostly models. And here we see non-models in the magazine. Female athletes have appeared in the swimsuit shoots. Steffi Graf appeared in 1997. In 2016, UFC fighter Ronda Rousey became the first female athlete to appear on the cover. So none of the cover models have been athletes until 2016. So just in saying what is this thing portraying, it's nothing about sports or athletics. It's simply models who were picked by the fashion modeling industry for their modeling looks, not anything to do with their athleticism.
Because it focuses on a very exceptional kind of high-end beauty. Mm-hmm. And so that beauty would involve symmetry and signals of youth, because that's part of beauty, sexual beauty, physical beauty, waist-to-hip ratio for women. But with Sports Illustrated, it's also highlighting a kind of athleticism in body type. And
that's not true.
That's a very specific form of beauty. You have to be young, you have to be female, generally, you have to be extremely athletic, you have to be shapely in a very particular way, and that would be with a waist-to-hip ratio of 0.68.
So here he keeps going on about the waist-to-hip ratio thing and saying that they are athletic women. So I looked this up a little bit. So he said young, symmetrical, which he did say that the current cover model, Yumi Nu, is symmetrical in her face, and she is young. And he's saying that they are athletic, which is not really true of all the models, but has been of some of them. So the first athlete model that was on the cover was Ronda Rousey. So I looked this up. Ronda Rousey's body measurements here, 34, 25, 34. So that's her waist and hips, 25, 34. And if we do that math, that is a 0.73 waist to hip ratio. So a little bit more than what he says is the ideal. He says it's 0.68.
Because that's what's been established cross-culturally as ideal from the perspective of male sexual interest, let's say, but that's also associated with fertility.
Yeah.
And so it's a marker that has a biological basis. And so even if you're a very beautiful woman, you're hard-pressed to be beautiful enough to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated for the swimsuit issue. And so it's a pinnacle achievement of sorts. and it's focused on a very idealized and specific form of beauty. And that's obviously exclusionary. It's obviously exclusionary. It excludes everyone. Mm-hmm. Right. And
now, so these are the standards that he's saying: young, fertile, and having a waist to hip ratio of 0.68. And as I said, Ronda Rousey's 0.734. But ratios are not based on absolute size; they scale up and down. So somebody could have bigger or smaller measurements and have a better ratio or a similar ratio. So this is the measurements for Yumi Nu. It's just so ridiculous that this is even a thing, but you just Google this stuff and you can find it. And I'm just pointing out to say that his defense, this is not really why he cares about this, but this is why he's saying he cares about it. So her measurements, 38, 36, 49. So her waist and hip is 36 and 49, and that ratio is 7:3:5. So it's the same as, actually, let me see there. I think I made a switch those ones up, but yeah. So actually this is Ronda Rousey's waist to hip ratio, 7:3:5, and Yumi Nu's is 7:3:4. So she actually has a better waist to hip ratio than Ronda Rousey. Now, Jordan is saying that's not the ideal, because the ideal is 0.68. And I did also look up, so last year's cover model does have a 0.68 waist to hip ratio. This is Lena Bloom. However, Lena Bloom is actually a man. That's a trans woman who has, through surgery, enhanced her appearance, his appearance, to look like a woman. And so this is a person that checks all of the markers that Jordan says is appropriate for a Sports Illustrated swimsuit cover, but it's not a woman, nor are they fertile at all. It would be impossible to impregnate that person. So that's a deceptive ideal. And he didn't seem to have any problem with that. So I guess the appearance is more important than the science in some ways. Or it must be something other than those measurements that, really would answer like Matt Walsh's question, what is a woman? Because you can have a 0.6 waist to hip ratio and have all the appearance of a woman and not be a woman. And he also wasn't upset about Elon Musk's mother being on the cover, and she's certainly not fertile because she's like 74 years old. So there's no uproar about that. I guess, I don't know.
And it does that to highlight a kind of ideal, and that's a particular ideal of beauty. And there are some cultural boundaries around that. So you could say, well, it's a westernized form of beauty. It's like, yeah, and you can point to Rubens' paintings of more plump women and say, well, there's an exception. It's like, great. You think you're a genius for finding that exception. Good for you. You know the Rubens painting. Like, more power to you. But that doesn't mean anything at all about the universality of images of beauty. And so the cover bothered me a lot because it was a cheap manipulation of something that had been working very well for Sports Illustrated. It was also an insistence that all of a sudden this non-athletic body type...
Most of the body types are non-athletic. They are sexual, but they're not athletic.
Is as beautiful as the standard swimsuit model for Sports Illustrated. And it's not. It's not as athletic, and it's not as healthy. And that's that.
Now, he brings up this issue that it's health, and that a woman who weighs more is unhealthy. But I think that, we could probably do a lot of research into the history of the supposed health of models, supermodels, and women, in particular some of the supermodels that have appeared on Sports Illustrated covers. And while we could say from a visual standpoint they have many markers of health, or what we consider to be health, they achieved some of those results through eating disorders, drug abuse, manipulative practices of, it's not, it's solely a routine to produce a visual result more so than a physical result that is the evidence of an actually healthy lifestyle. So health, that is a relative thing. And I'm not saying this because I'm, saying like, oh, we should just love everybody. That's not the main point. Obviously some people need to lose weight. And the girl on the cover, she might look better if she lost a little weight. But it's not enough to bring her into the category of not beautiful. And as far as the exploitative nature of it, I don't think that there's so few people that have a standard of modesty that even, like, at this point in time, Sports Illustrated swimsuit is tasteful because it's not explicitly pornography. In the past, it was basically pornography when we consider things like Playboy to be pornography. Sports Illustrated was like almost Playboy. It was much more of a much more controversial thing for a conservative person to have on their coffee table than it probably would be considered now.
And it's also not arbitrary. And so the whole thing is a lie. And then it's a lie that's a manipulation of that young woman. Now, she partakes in that because she participates in it. But it's still, they're not on her side. They're exploiting her, as far as I'm concerned. And she may be participating in that exploitation, but they're still exploiting her. So don't pull any moral stunts on me because you're irritated about my opinion about...
And remember, Jordan's also said that maybe exploitation isn't necessarily bad because it does help the people being exploited to achieve some better result than they otherwise could have. So
the Sports Illustrated cover, when it's bloody clear to anybody with eyes that was manipulative in 20 different ways. And I'm also not willing to sacrifice these ideals for inclusiveness. It's like, no, not everyone's a genius. No, not everyone's Picasso. No, not everyone's young and healthy. And no, not everyone is a Sports Illustrated swimsuit model, period. And fuck you if you don't like it. So that's basically what I thought about that. I certainly didn't think it would cause as much trouble as it did.
I would say that if we took all of the models of the Sports Illustrated issue, not even just in the recent years, but from its inception, there is quite a bit of variety. And to say that it's all about this 0.68 waist to hip ratio and athletic bodies and all this stuff is not true. I think that he is kind of projecting his particular version of an ideal on this thing. I think he probably is just doubling down and not wanting to admit that that was a stupid thing to say, which it was. It was a stupid thing to say. He shouldn't have just said nothing. That would probably have been the most productive thing. But anyway.
When people are on my case for being mean, it's like, yeah, I know, I'm always mean because, that's...
Well, also, life is hard and, life is mean, right? And it's hard for people... First of all, I have great sympathy for anybody overweight because of the health struggles I went through. And you lost a whole bunch of weight. It's not like being overweight's fun, right?
No.
That's a whole other problem to get into with, I think people...
And this is the part where Jordan and Michaela talk about how they, are so thankful that they are not overweight, which they have achieved through their very particular diet. And, just this thing of just equating, and I'm not going to say this is because the leftists are right about there's not that they're totally right, but there's a little bit of truth into this thing that being overweight is not necessarily the only unhealthy thing, because if in order to not be overweight or to be healthy, you have to embrace the Jordan and Michaela Peterson diet, then what do they eat? They only eat meat, just steak or lamb or whatever. And Michaela eats it well done, which is, ruining a expensive ingredient. But that's an unsustainable lifestyle for all of humanity. I can't afford to eat that way. I can't afford to just eat nothing but meat. Meat is expensive, and now we haven't, this inflation crisis. Price is going to go through the roof. I mean, the chances are that as food prices go up, maybe the heavier people are ultimately healthier, because it's only in a circumstance that being overweight is unhealthy. If you are in if food becomes scarce, your body, the reason why your body gains weight is to store calories for use in dire times. So currently we can say people that are overweight are unhealthy, but I don't know. What if God's been preparing America for a famine, except instead of Joseph hiding the harvest in warehouses, we've just been hiding it in our bodies, in our extra fat deposits, and that's the way that God's gonna save us. I mean, those after church buffets, the godly people are, they sometimes they're a little bit heavy.
People have such an issue losing weight,
yeah,
that society has said, it's fine. Because you've had so much trouble that terrible. It's probably your genetics.
Yeah.
So
there's truth in that. When I look at someone who's obese on the street, I think, oh, that's too bad. That's too bad. I don't think, obese pig eats too much, has no self-control. I don't think that. I think bad mismatch between genetic proclivity and appalling diet. And the appalling diet is basically, we're not going to get into this, but basically carbohydrate heavy and sugar loaded. And fair enough, we tried hard, the whole world, to make calories cheap. Mm-hmm. And we did that. So no one's starving, and great. But now we have an obesity problem, and it's a major problem. And I'm not going to pretend that it's okay. It's not okay. That doesn't mean I don't have sympathy for it. And I'm not willing to sacrifice any ideals for this idiot inclusiveness. I'm done with that. And so should everyone else be. And I think most people are. And
so he's not willing to sacrifice ideals, but if we're to follow his example, him and his daughter, this diet that they have, here's what they're eliminating from a cultural standpoint. For the sake of being healthy, which neither of them are healthy. To think that these people are necessarily healthier than Yumi knew because they weigh less is ridiculous, because Michaela's got all these fake joints, and she has to move to a new city because the tree allergies are too bad, and when her child gets a cold, it almost kills her every time. So that's pretty terrible. But here's what you eliminate if you put forth, for the sake of health, this carnivore diet, which don't get me wrong, I love steak and I wish I could eat it more, but I like it with a delicious side dish. And you are eliminating the culture of cuisine in general, all history of cooking, Jacques Pepin and Julia Child, they're gone. And when I went to Paris, I had an amazing meal, the most expensive meal of my life, at Joel Robuchon's restaurant. and his signature dish is mashed potatoes. And I paid $400 basically to eat those mashed potatoes, and they were worth it. And you know what? Like, that's a memory that I will remember for the rest of my life. And, you know, that's worth something, you know? So this, like, you know, what do you do when one ideal bounces into another ideal? Like, this is even the problem that we have with all this gender stuff, is that, you know, we had it before where people could do what they want in the privacy of their own home. It's not infringing on anybody else's rights. But then when they insist on being accepted by everybody, and even for the words and the, you know, everything to be offensive to them, now their ideal is encroaching on the ideals of others, and you can't have it all. So you have to sacrifice some things in some ways. And I would say, you know, for you know, and I wrote a little bit this in my article, but like, the obsession with health that people get to is so boring, and it's so terrible. Like, because you have no enjoyment in eating. And, you know, people that are just so concentrated on, like, when people are formerly fat and they lose weight, and then they're just like, this is their life, is I'm a healthy person now. And it's just all they talk about is what they eat and how they exercise and all this stuff. And like, they're exercising, and while they're exercising, they're like listening to podcasts about health and exercising and all this stuff. It's like, honestly, I mean, I don't even think that exercise is a fruitful activity. Like, the fact that we have exercise and like people need to do exercise, nobody should do exercise. You should do something that's productive, that uses your body. You know, like, go out into the woods, plant a garden, build something, you know, like, just going to the gym for the sake of having your body move means that's like a more of a thing that you need to address in your life than the fact that your body is unhealthy. And you know, I just think that it's this concept is not it's not looking at the whole picture.
They look at that cover and they know it's manipulative and a lie in a deep sense. But then if you point that out, and this is where we're at in the culture, there's all sorts of things now, if you point to it and you say, you know, that's a lie, people get upset. It's like, no, that's a lie. That's not a lie. You're just being mean. We're just being nice.
Yeah,
it's like,
1984.
You bet.
Exactly
No,
like
it's
that.
a lie.
Yeah.
It's like, here's another lie. Every 10-year-old knows what gender they are. And that's so fixed that surgical intervention may well be necessary, and it's illegal for you to suggest otherwise. However, your gender identity is so fluid that you can change it every hour if you want, and it's not fixed at all. Mm-hmm. And it's infinitely variable at your whim.
So here's where it really gets into the key part of the issue. Saying that an overweight woman is beautiful is a lie, and every 10-year-old knows what gender they are. And yet, children are deciding that they want to be associated as another gender, and they want to change that. And why is that? What are they getting? What is causing them to feel that way, and what is causing them to resist siding with reality? And this is where we get to the problem of it. If a child decides, now it's pretty much just trans, it seems like. It used to be that if a child decided that they were gay or whatever, as soon as you made that decision, you entered into a community where you received all of this affirmation, all of this praise that for making that decision, and that group of people makes you feel like you belong. And why is that so powerful? I think it's because of the way that people are wired. And so in some sense, even if the things that people are affirming about us aren't true, they are still super powerful. And so, you know, if the only recourse we have against the transgender movement is just brutal honesty, that that's not true, it's not going to work. And here's where it comes back to the Sports Illustrated cover, because, like I said, well, who checks all the boxes? It's last year's model, the one who's biologically a man, and so all the natural woman, both the larger overweight model and the super athletic MMA fighter, both of them fail in the standard of beauty that the man pretending to be a woman can reach. But who sets that standard? Jordan's going to say this is Darwinism, it's biological. I would say one of the hallmark achievements of humanity is that we are able to transcend our biological impulses. And so, can we not do that in our perception of beauty? And, we get to this concept of combinatorial explosion. If you, and what do we do to deal with combinatorial explosion is we reduce categories. So when we take all women and we reduce them to waist to hip ratio and facial symmetry, then we end up rejecting a whole lot of women. So they feel rejected as women, and then they say, perhaps I'm not going to be a good woman. This is like the prodigal son. I am not fit to be a son, but perhaps I can be a servant. Now, that's the mindset. And what happens, instead of the father coming and reaching for them and saying, no, you are my son, you are my daughter, I love you the way that you are, the way that you were meant to be, instead, you have somebody else saying, yeah, be a servant. Being a servant is the best. Being a slave is the best. Like, we believe in you. We're so glad that you came here to be a servant in this household. And that affirmation is so powerful. So when a woman says, maybe I'm really a boy, then they just are all of a sudden, so much affirmation in that choice. And if we are not, so what do we need to do? We need to celebrate everything that is genuine and real about a girl becoming a woman and about boys becoming men. And we need to affirm all those things. And really, we need to widen our categories a little bit. And honestly, in that regard, I mean, we don't need the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. Defending that is stupid. And as I said in my article that I wrote, it's basically it was a cheap way to sell magazines, because married guys that were too ashamed or knew that it was wrong to go and buy real pornography back when it wasn't instantly accessible all the time. They knew they were going to get that one magazine once a year, and they'd just go out and check the mailbox to make sure they get it before their wife sees it and whatever, which is like, who doesn't know that that's coming at some point? But so it's not like we don't need an external standard to tell us what it is. Your standard should be based on the couple hundred people that you actually meet, that you'll actually get to see and talk to and have a relationship with. And so I think, those standards are harmful in a sense if we only allow them to be one particular type of person. Because as I said, if we're just saying it's just these things, this list. Well, we found a man that meets those requirements. But that's not what it means to be a woman. It's not just about those measurements and those appearances. You know, a woman can bring forth life, something that man will never be able to do, despite how fertile they may look. It's not there. So brutal honesty alone is not the answer, because and this is a spiritual thing, because what do we really need? We need to understand that we are all sinful people and that we all fall short. And in that way, the person who's affirming something that's not immediately evident about us is God. And God tells us that we are his sons and we are his daughters. And he sees us in a way that we don't see ourselves and others don't see us. And so for us to see people as they truly are and as they truly could be is a divine act. And this is a way that we can actually make the world a better place. And so, I'm not saying this is like a perfect thing, because like you said, like this swimsuit issue is a stupid thing. That's not what we should have. But like, we should be celebrating all types of women who are being women for womanly things, which goes beyond just their waist to hip ratio or their weight. And, it's just, this is not the way that we can win. We cannot win culture wars by being harsh and cruel and brutal, especially with our children, And that's the thing, as a parent, sometimes you need to correct your children and they don't like it. But if they understand that you still love them and that you're doing it because you want them to be better, then you will help them be better. You'll help them become the thing that they are meant to be.
Okay, I'm supposed to accept all of that, am I? Every single bit of that set of propositions, even though they're entirely internally contradictory, which means it's actually impossible for me to accept all of those propositions and to stay sane. Well, yeah, but if you don't, you're mean. It's like you're a predator. Well, that brings something else I want to talk to you about. I've been thinking about this a fair bit. I talked to Franz de Waal, primatologist, genius primatologist in my estimation. Yeah, and I don't know if there's a Nobel Prize that would be specifically appropriate for Franz de Waal, but if there was a Nobel Prize for the sort of science he's doing, he would deserve it, because he's discovered things that they're unbelievably fundamental. For example, he's discovered that sometimes in chimp troops, the smallest male is the alpha.
Really?
Yeah, that it's not dependent on power. A smaller...
I don't remember exactly where he goes with this whole thing, but basically, chimpanzees are not going to give us the answers to these problems. And, if we don't realize that we as human beings can transcend some of these things, like here's the issue. We want it to be all black and white, and we want the people on the right to be correct and the people on the left to be wrong. But that's not true. Like, they are right about some things. They're doing it in a really bad way. And so I think that we need to figure this out. Like, can a woman be beautiful even if she weighs more than she could? Yes. Would losing weight help her to be more beautiful? We could say yes, maybe it would. Would becoming another gender help? No. That's like the line too far. Your gender, sex and gender, which should be synonymous, are not changeable. So that's the limit of where we stop the affirming. But and a person's age, someone says like, I pretend like I'm a 6-year-old, or if they say they're not a human, they're an animal or whatever. Like, no, that's not true. Like, it's not hard to figure out what these limits are, but I think that wisdom requires that this is something Paul Vanderklay was talking about in his recent chat that he did. He's talking about common grace and antithesis. We probably should err on the side of common grace, but we need to know where the hard lines of antithesis are, and that's where we need to. That's where we need to be hard. We need to be firm, but we need to be loving. And the problem is that I see that this thing, this discussion, it's not going to help the people who are vulnerable. It's not going to help young people who do not feel like they have what it takes to compete in the world of feminine beauty or in the world of masculine success to try, because we've limited our framework of what that success looks like so much. So, and my general impression when I got through this whole thing is like, I remember reading 12 Rules for Life and Jordan's talking about how hard it was as a parent to deal with Michaela's struggles and her injuries and stuff. And I almost feel like he probably would have had a harder time if his kid was overweight. Or perhaps if he had an overweight child, he would see that this is a ridiculous argument. Because, that's sometimes, like, there are people who have circumstances where they really can't affect this stuff. And I don't think that we need a standard of beauty that is this genetic thing. Because, or whatever, it's a biological thing. It's like, we have biological, Jordan himself has even said, he has a biological problem with alcohol that, like, he had a real hard time handling that. But so his biology tells him, drink more alcohol. But at some reason, he's able to figure out, no, that's not good. So, we can transcend our biology when it's helpful. Like, we have brains and we have wisdom. We need to figure that out, how to use that. I remember there's a guy who I became friends with on Facebook because he was an alumni of the college that I went to, and like way before I went there. And so I never met him in person or whatever, but I just remember seeing he had, this is like a cruel thing to say, but like the ugliest wife that I've ever seen. But part of this was because she had cancer, and it was like in her jaw and her face, and she had one of her eyes was removed, and like she was not pleasing to look at. And yet when she passed away, it was just so evident from his posts of how much sadness he had from missing her and how much love he had for her. And that is we can choose. We really can choose what we see as beautiful. And this is where the thing of combinatorial explosion comes in. Each person is so unique that to compare one person to just an arbitrary standard, even if it's biologically driven, it means that we are missing an almost infinite amount of uniqueness about that person. And chances are, is there anything more beautiful than uniqueness in a way? Like, it's irreplaceable. So whatever makes a person unique, you can't find it anywhere else. And so I think of that way, that man loved his wife because she was his wife. They spent their life together. They raised children together. Her physical beauty, I don't know, I'm sure she probably looked attractive when she was younger, but her physical beauty was gone from that relationship. But his love for her was very beautiful. And that's a thing that we choose to have. And when we choose to be charitable towards people, that is beautiful. That's a beautiful act of love. And sometimes it does mean telling the truth. If a woman says, I want to be a man, or if a man says, I want to be a woman, the loving thing is to say, no, that's not possible. But if a girl who weighs a little bit more, who, apparently her mother was a model and encouraged her in modeling, and she had affirmation to become a model and do this thing, to be selected for what, as Jordan says, is considered a standard of beauty for our culture, is the ultimate thing. And, as a Christian, I don't really agree with the whole concept of the swimsuit issue, but I think that just even seeing the fact that that is such a positive thing for her life, because it means that she has love and acceptance and appreciation and all this. I don't think we should just let only the leftists, the Marxists, the woke people have that, because that was God's first. That thing of seeing and affirming beauty that others don't notice is a divine act. It's something that God gives. So this was that's probably where I'm going to stop for now. There's some more stuff later on in the video. Where he talks about, they talk about what sexuality, casual relationships, hookup culture, all this stuff. You can't build a standard on a foundation of sand. And that's the thing that's just sad, is that, and this is Michaela is becoming a Christian now. The answers are there, and they're very apparent. And the answers to all these problems have been known for a long time. And that's why I think, purity culture messed some stuff up. But the Christian ideal of sexuality is the answer. And it's the thing that the devil is most afraid of, because if he loses his monopoly on the free market, if people willingly find out and choose, because they find out that the Christian model of sexuality produces the most fulfillment on a personal level and as a family and all this, then it's, if you stack it up, there's no contest. There's no contest between what could be offered by people choosing to pick one person, who it could be almost anyone. I don't know. I kind of think this, I was toying with this idea of maybe the Christian incels need to start just going for the mail order brides, or considerably lowering their standards, because pursuing a relationship is not about what that person can do for you. It's about finding someone who you can bless and you can serve and you can love. So you make it about the other person, what you can do for them. And in doing that, you will be happier than you would ever otherwise be. And that's the thing that Christianity needs to bring forth. And the conservatives need to be championing that. So, that's all I have for now on that one. And hopefully I don't end up doing any more videos about this, but it just sort of, his doubling down was a little bit sad to me. So